Hello everyone and welcome to today's session. So I'd like to introduce myself. I am the research coordinator of Carmona National High School and also the current president of MCARE in the district of Carmona. So I am also the representative of East Cluster in the division of Cavite. So in my 6th year in a research community, I hope I can share something with you about writing and action research. So I'm going to discuss the two subparts of action research method, the participants and other sources of data, and also the data gathering methods. So we have three objectives for this session. First, describe the participants in the research study. Second, distinguish primary from secondary sources and qualitative from quantitative data. Then the third is describe the different techniques in data gathering method. So the action research methods is the fourth section in the action research proposal. So it has four subparts, but we will focus only on the first two. So I guess this part is mainly read by the experts who are interested in the procedures used in the study, and also to those who want to gain information that they can use themselves. So the participants and the gathering methods must be described in detail so that it can be easily understood and replicate. So let's start with the participation and other sources of data. So in a research paper, participants, respondents, and subjects are the terms used interchangeably to those who assist us in the research inquiry. So this is not a trivial matter. So there is a certainly room for personal reference. But because these terms describes particularly and different relationships with the researcher, so it should be discussed and used with care. For example, participants, they are anyone who participates in the study. So in general, example, in interview or survey or an experiment. So while the respondent, it is the term favored in sociology in survey designs where those involved respond or answer questionnaires. So if the problems involve a sociological problem, so they use the term respondents, while the subject usually refers to someone who is part in the experiment in scientific research. So, but I also believe that it is the author's personal prerogative to select the term used in the study. So it's up to you. What are the criteria in choosing the participants? So I have here the following questions that are useful guide in choosing the participants in your study. So first, who will be your participants? Second, how do you select the participants? Third, how many participants do you need? And the fourth is, how do you contact the participants? So let's discuss that one by one. So first, who will be your participants? So you have to look for the background of the participants based from your research questions. So based from their relevant experience in relation to the topic. For instance, you want to plan to study the influence of teachers' years of experience on their attitude towards the new technology, for example. Then you should report the range of teachers' years of experience. Okay, so that's their background. In another example, if you plan to study how the socioeconomic level relates to their, the socioeconomic level of students relates to their preferred learning modality, so you should briefly mention that the students participants came from low, middle, or high income background. So finally, mention whether the participants participated voluntarily. So you have to include information on whether they gave informed consent. So if the participant were children, you have to mention that their parents consented to their participation. Second is, how do you select participants? Okay? In quantitative research, so it requires standardization of the procedures and selection of participants. So, random selection of participants to remove the potential influence of external variables. And of course, to ensure the generalizability of results. So usually, they use probability sampling in choosing the participants. But because so here, each sample or each participant has equal chance of being selected. So in contrast, the selection of participants in qualitative research is purposeful. So it means they use the non-probability sampling technique. So the participants are selected who can best inform the research questions and enhance understanding of the topic under study. So this slide shows the two classification of sampling methods. So the probability sampling and the non-probability sampling. So in probability sampling, as I have said earlier, so each has equal chance of being selected. So it can be systematic, stratified, cluster, or a simple random sampling. On the other hand, in probability sampling, it is purposive. So you can employ convenience sampling, judgment, quota, or snowball. So take note that if your research has an exploratory purpose, or you need for a quick decision, or you already have a target participants, it is better to use non-probability sampling. But if you need a representative sample, and you will apply statistical inference, or you need to minimize the selection bias, then the probability sampling is highly recommended. Okay, so the next is, how many participants do you need? So it depends on your research design. So the sample size used in qualitative research methods is often smaller than the quantitative research method. So the goal of the qualitative research method should be the attainment of saturation. So in qualitative research, according to Charmas, he suggests to use 25 to 30 participants as the minimum sample size to reach the saturation. So when we say saturation, that's the repetition of the same information. So the number of participants also depends on the statistics to be used in the study. So if you want to perform a number of statistical comparisons, of course, you will need a larger sample. Next is in quantitative research, Slovin's formula should be applied if the population is too large. So usually it works in random sampling. So that is our formula of Slovin's. And then you have to consider the total number of population and the margin of error to get the sample size. So then the sample size you can get from the Slovin's formula. So it represents, that is the representative of the large group from where they were selected. Lastly, how do you contact participants? So typically, the participants, they respond in person or by phone or through email. So you have to consider also the ethical consideration. So it is stated in the Republic Act 10173. So it is also known as the Data Privacy Act of 2012, which safeguards the confidentiality of information of the participants. So it is important that the participant has informed consent, that the participation is voluntary, that you do no harm. Of course, the confidentiality and the anonymity of the participants, and you have to assess only the relevant components. So I have here a sample description of the participants. So if you read the description of the participants in this study, although this is not a proposal, so this study is already conducted, that's why you can see that the verbs used here is past tense. So in a proposal, you will use the future tense of verbs. So here, the participants of the study were 15. So it's stated here how many participants. There are 15 elementary teachers in Talisay Elementary School. So who are the participants? The 15 teachers in Talisay Elementary School. How they are selected? They are chosen purposively. So it means the researcher used the non-probability sampling. So it's because the 15 elementary teachers in Talisay Elementary School is represented the total population of the school in the Calatagan district. Okay, then the rest of the sentence, the rest of the description, it includes the background of the participants. Okay? Here is another sample description of the participants. In this sample, the data were collected via internet using inventory and demographic questionnaire. So still it is a quantitative research. So the subjects were 163 certified teachers. And then again, the next sentences refers to the background of the participants. Next is the other source of data and information. So it is the participants still that provides the data that will answer to our research question. When you say data, it refers to any kind of information researchers obtain on the subjects, respondents, or the participants of the study. So it is used to answer the research questions or objectives of the study. So data can be classified into two according to its source. Okay, so it's the primary sources of data and the secondary source of data. So the primary source of data, these are collected by the researchers through the first-hand sources. For example, mga surveys, interviews, questionnaires, tests, observations, if you have checklists and rating scales. So these are the first-hand sources of information. But if you use the journals, the books, the annual reports, the websites, and other publications available for public use, these data are the secondary sources of data. So these are the second-hand data collected by an individual who is not the original user. So here's the examples of data. So for example, the demographic information. So in the demographic information, you can get data such as the age, the gender, the number of children, the marital status, and also the socioeconomic data such as their household income, the homeowner, if they are homeowner or just a renter. No, these are demographic information. So if your respondents or the participants are students, then you can get data such as the achievement test results, the grades, their test scores. No, these are examples of data. So data can be classified into two. So the qualitative and the quantitative data. When we say quantitative data, these are the information which can be counted or they are expressed in numerical values. Example, age, grades, income, test scores, level of satisfaction, the length of service. So they have numerical values. On the other hand, the qualitative data, these are the information which has no numerical values. For example, attitudes, person's experience, designation, gender, and the like. So they are qualitative data. So the next part is the data gathering method. So in data gathering method, it refers to the process of collecting of information that can answer the questions you pose in your statement of the problem. Okay? So there are various methods that you can use in collecting data for a research study. So each has its advantages and disadvantages. And as a researcher, of course, you should be able to identify when it is appropriate to use this method. So the action research can collect both quantitative and qualitative data to analyze and interpret and solve their problems. So the choice of the method is dependent on the needs of the research. Let's discuss some. For example, so the quantitative data are observations, surveys, interview, and questionnaires. So in observation, or observation method of gathering data, it is usually used in situations where the respondents cannot answer the research questions to obtain the information for the research study. So in this method, you have to prepare a checklist using appropriate scale or rating scale that may categorize the behavior or the attitude that you are observing. So that is to answer the questions that you post in your study. So that's for the observation. So in survey, it is used to collect data to know the characteristics of the population. So for example, the Learner Enrollment and Survey Form, or the LESF, used by the DepEd as the main enrollment tool to gather the data of our learners for school year 2020 in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's an example of survey. Next is the interview. Okay? So interview can be structured or unstructured. Okay? Or it can be a closed or open-ended questions. Okay? For the interview. While the questionnaires, it may be standardized or a research-made questionnaires. So when we say standardized questionnaire, it has gone through the process of psychometric validation and has piloted and revised. Okay? So if not, so that's only a research-made questionnaires. So that's for the quantitative data. And the tools that we're going to use to collect the quantitative data are face-to-face. We can use also online. We can use mail, email, or through phone. So these are the tools that can be used in gathering data quantitatively. And the last is the qualitative data. So the basic and the most common methods of data collection used in qualitative data are the observation, the interview, the document review, and the audiovisual data. So in observation, as what I have said a while ago, so the researcher takes field notes on the behavior and the activities of the participants in their natural setting. Okay, so observation can be done quantitatively or qualitatively. So while for the interview, the researcher may conduct face-to-face with the participants or through telephone or through group interview. Same with the quantitative data. So while for the document review, it takes in the form of documents, mga public documents such as newspaper, magazines, mga minutes of meeting, mga official reports, and the like. So yung mga personal documents such as, or yung mga private documents such as journals, diaries, letters, mga emails, it can also be a source of data for a document review. And the last is the audiovisual data. So this audiovisual data, it may take in the form of photographs, art objects, mga videotapes, and any forms of sounds. That's audiovisual data. So I have here an example of data gathering procedure. The researcher secured a permission of the office of the of the school principal of the Lisay Elementary School for the data gathering procedure. Usually, that's the first step. So then upon approval, the researchers distributed the questionnaires to the respondents of the study. For the ethical considerations, the respondents were assured that their responses will be treated with utmost confidentiality, and the results will be used for research and professional development purposes. So these are the components or the content of the data gathering procedure. Okay, so that's it. So I'd like to end my presentation with this quote: you can have data without information, but you can have information without, you cannot have information without data. So that's according to Daniel Case Martin, a science fiction writer. In God we trust, all others must bring data. Okay? That's all for today. Thank you very much.